So at the turn of last century was a golden era for new media experiences, for immersive experiences. Across the United States, tram lines or trolleys would deliver people from the centre of the city to an amusement park on the outskirts of their town. Families and people of all classes were given free rides on the tram to sort of explore new spaces. And that's the iconic utopian example of the amusement park that some of us think of today. But in the 20s and the 10s, with the emergence of the motor car and cinema and the Depression, thousands, literally thousands of amusement parks started to fail and become abandoned. And it created a new kind of zeitgeist, the image of the amusement park as somewhere that was sort of dark and strange. So these parks were closing and they had all this space, but they didn't have any money. They had ballrooms and bowling alleys, and so they needed something to do with that space, something that could be done with minimum amount of employees and maximum amount of engagement. So Leon Cassidy and Marvin Renfro, two inventors, amusement park builders, engineers from New Jersey, patented a device called an amusement railway. Back at the turn of the century, most amusements were petrol-powered. They were noisy, motorised kind of vehicles. This was a subtle electric vehicle, and they built a patent for how this electric vehicle could shuffle people through a very small space and trigger off a range of attractions. Things, lights going on, sound effects going off. And this actual patent goes through those things in detail, where certain things would happen, how the electricity would run the vehicles, but it's also about narrative. So the patent was about the way the story would be told. So what this invention did is it set out a format, if you like, a dev pack for those IT people amongst us, a way for you to build an immersive experience in a space. And they decided to call their company the Pretzel Ride Company because of the way that the cart wound in on itself. It delivered this really dense experience in a small space. So carnivals that had no money but had space could use them to develop dark attractions with a minimum amount of effort, with just one attendant kind of pressing a button and sending a cart off into the darkness. So a lot of my research centered on the fact that this early example of electric media did all of the things that our contemporary media tries to do. That VR, immersive cinema, IMAX, it set out a plan for a range of interactions. It used haptics, it used triggered sound, and it used 360 immersion, a type of scene building that was sort of unseen before, because most of the time you would locate your audience either outdoors so they could look around, or you'd have them in front of a cinema screen. There were elements of theatre and museum and cabaret that went into this, but this was an automated experience. You didn't need actors, so it could be programmed and it could be distributed for the first time. But almost from their invention, amusement parks continued to fail. And even despite the distribution of this amazing format that in some way I'd say everybody in this room has experienced, they began to be defunct, destroyed, abandoned en masse. And from afar, I was really interested in that. My research seemed to be disappearing. The thing that I thought was really interesting about entertainment history was disappearing. And you know, every hipster with a blog had a photograph of an abandoned amusement, but I was like, what are we doing about it? And in 2007, I travelled to Keansburg in New Jersey. Has anybody been to Keansburg, New Jersey? Exactly. No one's been there. So in Keansburg, New Jersey was the Spook House. And in 2007, I went there. I went there because it is the oldest electric indoor cart-based amusement in America. And there it is. And there's a picture on the left of it running back in the 30s. So it was built in 1934. Now, that's pretty damn old, right? But Hurricane Sandy completely destroyed it. And you can still see the facade of the building. It hasn't been rebuilt. The ride owners have been on like reality TV shows talking about how they're going to rebuild the carts. So it's established that it's an antique, but no one's been there and no one cares. And what I would put to you today is that there are many examples of entertainment history that haven't been archived, from pinball alleys to outdoor cinemas to even horror films that aren't given their position in the general scheme of entertainment. And that really is the theme of today, that there are all sorts of examples of immersive entertainment that really should be and can be used as great examples of all sorts of technology that you can apply when you're building your own. Okay, let's get to the fun bit. So I was pretty angry about this ride being demolished, and I thought, well, what can I do? I've done a lot of research, I've documented, I've connected with a community of dark ride enthusiasts across the country, and I'd located the last 14 dark rides. Here they are, little moving skulls. This is where they exist. There are new examples of dark rides like Harry Potter and that, but in terms of the history, the places we can go to look at the different states, the different territories, the different styles of dark ride and to actually learn about them and see how they might have influenced all sorts of areas of culture, this is where they are. So that was my mission statement, to travel to these 14 sites and capture the last of America's dark rides. But how? Some sites that I was particularly interested, this is the Laughland in upstate New York in Sylvan Beach, the Pirates Cove in Ocean City, Maryland. The Pretzel Company distributed these rides all across the world. And luckily, a few of them still exist, and one of them is in Melbourne, Australia. And it is now the second oldest pretzel ride in the world. None of the oldest exist here. The oldest ones are in Australia and in England. And luckily it was down the road from me. And so I thought, what if I went down there? I said, I want to travel the world, and I want to record dark rides using virtual reality, because there's a great interest in virtual reality. There's a great interest in horror. I built a specialty camera rig that I could use to capture their ride, and I started to test it. All right, I went on the equivalent of Craigslist and found some good cameras, not too old, and started to kind of test out how I could achieve this. It's obviously a really difficult thing to do. But I already knew I had the support of a really crazy bunch of people, enthusiasts online. And so I began to capture them. Using 3 cameras, using 4 cameras, I rigged up this bizarre contraption that would attach to the ride. And so people have begun to contact me and even tell me about rides that they had rebuilt. We found a guy in Oxford, Alabama, who had bought a 1964 original ride that had been demolished. In fact, it's the first slide that I showed today. He contacted me and he said, I've got that ride, I've rebuilt it, and I got on a plane straight away. So I was able to now create a lot of really interesting footage that could sort of re-energize the interest of fairground owners and the like. One of my favorite places to go is Trimper's Amusements in Ocean City, Maryland, and they've got a park that's beautiful, that they do everything to maintain. There's a whole family that's been running the park for 70 years, but they don't have people to photograph it. And so I was able to generate some amazing imagery from this sort of content. This is the Haunted Mansion in Funland Rehoboth in Delaware. So what became interesting as you'd sort of travel to these places was not only the importance of the ride, not only the links that people had to these rides from their youth, but the construction of these rides was quite often a hybrid or a postmodern approach to entertainment design. They had bought the cart maybe in the 50s or the 60s, but since then people had approached them and said, oh look, we've got a park that's no longer running, we've got a skeleton, we've got a lady who spins around the bar who's mutilated, we've got this and we've got that. What's left is actually a sort of collage or a museum of memories. And so people go to Rehoboth and say, that's the skull from the ride back in Jersey. That's the wiggling skeleton that I saw when I grew up in a different place, in a different time. And you can see all of this online. This is Luna Park in Melbourne, one of the wiggliest, one of the darkest, and one of the oldest in the world. But what I'm doing here is not creating replicas of these rides. I'm archiving the experience. So I can now go back and say, well, we can look at what the Pretzel Ride Company originally tried to do, and I can then see it in practice. I can say that, when you pass this point, something attracts your eye to the left, and then the fright comes on the right. The sort of things that you see in horror cinema, the jump cut done in a physical fashion. The kind of thing that what John will talk about later, you'll see embodied in everyday haunts and attractions. Santa Cruz is another example of a park that has rebuilt the facade of the ride over and over again, but maintained an homage to the form. It's the only traditional dark ride in California that has any link to the sort of history. And I mean, there are people doing interesting things, but this is really a lost art. And I'm not saying that it needn't be. I'm just concerned that we maintain and find a way to pay tribute to it. Knoebels Amusement Park in Pennsylvania, their entire park is old rides from other abandoned amusements. And their Haunted Mansion is probably the best tribute to all other dark rides. There's the spinning lady. But there's some beautiful artistry too, especially in Knoebels, which if you ever get a chance to go to. Thanks to the world of horror enthusiasts like John, I've been able to travel and share these sort of stories and integrate that and learn a lot about contemporary horror. And I think the real point of this is that a lot of these parks are really struggling and perhaps their rides won't be around long enough. But illustrated by this panel, there is a connection to contemporary haunted attractions, and that's a multi-billion-dollar industry that John will talk about in his talk. But I want to create that connection, and all of the enthusiasts, anybody who's into horror, immediately connects with this. But yet, the tyranny of distance, the fact that these parks are in Huntington, West Virginia, or in obscure parts of New Jersey, Maryland, whatever it might be, we can't get to them. So at least with the virtual reality side of things, I'm able to create a kind of link. American Dark Ride is a project that I've been working on where I've collected the other tales, the documentary tales of my journey, play a snippet.
My name's Joel and I love spooky rides. From ghost trains to haunted houses, the older the better. For 10 years I've been traveling the world, checking out these crazy contraptions and meeting the people who keep them running year after year. Join me on a tour of America's spookiest haunted attractions. This is American Dark Ride.
I wanted to talk, just to finish off, about the role of rides and loss. Because all through this, it's been about what we've lost. And it's a common theme in horror. Our fear of change, our fear of the outside world, the evolution of suburbs and urban life. This is the old mill. It's just outside of Pittsburgh. It's not a cart-based ride, but it is an electric ride. It's still running today. This is a picture of it in 1906. Still running. It's an old mill ride. It's a boarded up, scary old mill. And the interesting thing about that is that at the turn of the century, the landscape surrounding Pittsburgh was full of, and still is today, if you look at this photograph, of abandoned mills. The themes of these rides and the spaces that they inhabit reflect not only interesting use of technology, but they reflect on the loss and memory that is in the landscape. And it's a very American thing and very important. So here is an old mill from just down the road. And if we think about boarded up spaces, we think about fear of what lies behind an empty building, where the old mill sits just outside of Pittsburgh is the same place. It's within a mile, I guess, or a couple of kilometres, I would say, of where Romero shot all of his Night of the Living Dead and Dead trilogies. And so the thematics of loss and fear and space carry on from the amusement park, from its sense of loss and fear, from the emptiness of those spaces, into cinema.
Thank you. Let's hear for Joel.